All right. So PRI is it's a basic model about how our consciousness develops, and it was developed by Ingeborg Bosch, who is a Dutch therapist. She did this about 20 years ago, and it has been developing it all these years. And it's really a model of how our consciousness functions, and it's very, very helpful, as you will see. So I will start straight away with the basic idea, which is that if you imagine that we are born or even conceived with an undivided consciousness. So if you imagine your consciousness like a circle, and it's just completely undivided, whatever comes into the circle gets processed, and it comes out, it has a corresponding output that is adequate and in relation to the input of the circle. So in other words, a baby that has hunger, feels hunger, which is an input from outside, then cries as an adequate response to that input. If you would have a baby that after a few weeks doesn't cry anymore, even though it's hungry, there is no more undivided consciousness, because it's not an adequate response to what it's experiencing. So this undivided consciousness, we could just say it starts at birth, even though we know that it starts much earlier, because the emotional state of the mother has a lot of influence on the pregnancy, as we know now. But let's say it starts at birth, just for the sake of the model. So the undivided consciousness, the circle is the model, is in the beginning undivided, as the child is completely dependent and completely helpless and vulnerable. It is, whatever happens to it is really whatever the parents can provide, or the caregivers, hopefully the parents in the ideal situation, and otherwise the caregivers. I will just say mother and father, or parents, even though we know it might be other people in some cases. So the needs that are there for the newborn, for the child, need to be fulfilled. Of course, they cannot always be fulfilled. Even in the ideal situation, that parents are aware of the needs, they are aware of their importance, they are aware of the complete helplessness of the child and of its dependence of them, there will always be situations where they cannot 100% fulfill the needs of the child. So we have to realize that we all grow up with having these moments where our needs have not been fulfilled. Now, let me just keep an eye on my notes so I don't go too fast. Right, so we have the circle of the undivided consciousness in the beginning. The input is unblocked, it comes in, it gets processed, the output is adequate. If not all the basic needs are fulfilled, like if there is a need that is not fulfilled, this experience for the baby is incredibly painful. It cannot bear it. The thing is that there is no sense of time. So for the baby, whatever it feels at that moment, for example, it feels pain, or it feels it feels pain and it's not being picked up, for example, and comforted. For the baby, this moment, it's endless, it's eternal, because it has no sense of time. So this moment, the dependence and the helplessness makes, and the no sense of having sense of time, makes that it's too painful for the child to experience this and to live with this. So what the brain does, it develops a psychological immune system. So if you imagine this circle, and there is like a dot, there's an input that is too painful to bear, and this input cannot be, it gets repressed. So the consciousness gets divided, a wall gets built around this part of the consciousness, and the trauma or the experience gets repressed and is not being experienced as something that the baby cannot handle and cannot change. So instead of that, the wall of defense that protects this consciousness will experience a defense. It's telling itself a kind of lie, you could say. So what our brain does is it helps us survive childhood, really, by creating illusions which make us think that everything is all right, we're being taken care of just fine. Whatever is happening is due to another reason. Or in the case of the first defense, which is fear, there is still hope that I can get out of this. I will explain about that a little later. So there's a psychological immune system which protects us from feeling this pain, which would be too much to bear because it is endless and there is no cognitive capacity to process it and to understand why this is happening, and to make it relative and be understanding about it. For example, my mother isn't paying attention to me even though I'm crying because she's overwhelmed because she was very sick or whatever is happening, or she has another 5 children or 2. So that would be a cognitive reasoning, which is not possible for the baby. So we build a wall around the old pain. The pain at that moment is not old, it's there. But we all have this part in our consciousness which is completely repressed. It's part of the primitive consciousness, which is a primitive brain, which is the emotional memory. It's in the amygdala. And what happens is that when we grow up, we don't really need this anymore because we could experience or could understand that those experiences were for that time, but now they don't threaten us anymore. But what happens is something else. So we deny this childhood consciousness unconsciously. We don't know it exists. We don't feel it. It's completely repressed. And we live with these illusions that come up. And I'll explain to you how that works. Every time as an adult, when we encounter a symbol, and the symbol is something that we perceive outside of ourselves. This thing that we perceive, our brain, our amygdala, our primitive brain, is scanning all day long for threats and danger. So when we perceive unconsciously with this part of the brain a threat, it rings the alarm bell immediately. So we have this circle. I will show it to you in the book, which is maybe better to see it that way. What happens is it catapults us to this childhood experience, to the old pain. But because our immune system is still functioning so well, it catapults us further on into the wall of denial, which is a defense. And there is this, wait, I'll show you this is the consciousness, the model of the consciousness. Up here you have the part where we are aware of, that's the adult consciousness. So a lot of us, what we do can be in the adult consciousness, and there is no division there, but there is the wall of denial, the wall of defenses, which protect this repressed part where the wounds of our childhood trauma is. Now, this wall of denial is actually where we are most of the time. Very often, you will notice when you start looking at your own defenses, how often we are in defenses. And the symbol is something that you perceive outside yourself, which somehow, somewhere, it might be a glance, it might be the tone of a voice, it might be a blue sky, it might be a situation you're in. something outside yourself which reminds the brain of that situation. It says alarm, and it shoots you into your defense. So we cannot remove these traumas. They have happened. And we don't even really need to analyze them very much in order to the aim is to get out more and more, to get out of this wall of defenses. So if we can learn, if we can integrate this old reality into the adult consciousness, so in the part of the brain, the cortex, which is actually processing things, then we do not need this wall of defense anymore. Or, you know, I think the ideal would be no wall of defense. I guess that's impossible. But it can get so much better when you do this work that you actually, you know, when you get into the wall of defense, that it's just for a moment and that you are able to do the work very quickly and, you know, are not bothered by it anymore. So this is the work that we do with PRI, with past reality integration. We integrate the old reality into today's reality. And we get less and less the situation where we have a divided consciousness, and more we come into the sphere of undivided consciousness, in the adult consciousness, where we can fulfill our potential and come, you know, closer and closer to our true selves. Now, how do the defenses work? I'm just checking my notes. Right, I'm going to just go quickly into the 5 defenses that Ingeborg has determined. The first defense is the defense of fear. And this defense gets developed when the child is younger, up to about 2 years old. Wait, this is the wrong one. Fear is something that is a defense, even though it's still very much in the body. Here you see the wall of defenses. So the lowest defense, closest to the old pain, is fear. This is not a cognitive defense. It's a very much a physical defense, and it has a lot of adrenaline, and it's like, you know, it makes you fight or flight. It's something that's a defense because it has the illusion that there is hope, that it might be saved. That's what fear does. When you have no more fear in a situation that's life-threatening, you give up and you die. So fear is actually life-saving at this point. Oh, somebody's trying to join. Okay, sorry. Let me see. Is there anyone else? Okay. I don't know if she's in now. Admit, yes. I didn't see that. Hi, Sharon. So we all muted our microphones because I'm recording this. All right. Okay. So I'll continue. So we have said that the first defense is fear. It's very much, it's in the body. It's a physical defense, not cognitive. It has a lot of energy and adrenaline. It will give you the power to fight or flight. And what it's really, the illusion there is saying, this situation is not life-threatening. There is still hope that I can be saved. So that's what fear does to you. It gives you the power to fight, and it gives you the hope. There is an element of hope. That's why fear protects us at the stage of, you know, under 2 years old from really, you know, giving up because the pain is too much. Then the second defense is primary defense. Now the primary defense gets developed around 18 months and later. And it's the first cognitive defense. This defense is the main illusion we're really telling ourselves lies, which is part of the immune system of our brain and very helpful when we're children, but we have to decode these and you know, like kind of demask or unmask these illusions when we are adults. So this, the main thought when we have primary defense is that we are at fault. So there's three main things. I'm guilty, I am useless, I can't do it, and I'm overwhelmed. So, or I'm not good. So those are the main ideas, and it's connected to very low energy. It's connected to a feeling of wanting to hide under a rock. You want to hide from the world. You want to. It's definitely leading to depression. If you are a lot in primary defense, you may end up in depression and even suicide. So this defense is very painful. You are telling yourself as a child, and then later as an adult, whenever you are in that defense, you're telling yourself that you are the one to blame for this situation, and that's what saves you when you are a baby, and because you cannot bear to have that pain of your caregiver not being able to fulfill that need at that moment. Then the third level is two defenses, which are like two different sides of the same coin. They have the same kind of energy. They're both very much connected to a lot of energy, to a lot of adrenaline and those kind of hormones. And the one is false hope, which has as a main idea behind it, the main thought is, if only I could, then my need will be fulfilled and everything will be fine. So our illusion is, if I can only be perfect in my job, then all will be fine. If only I am exactly on time for this appointment, everything will be fine. If only I am always beautiful and everybody likes me, then everything will be all right. So you're constantly doing, trying to do something very well, very in the false hope that then your old need will be fulfilled, but it will never be fulfilled because it has happened in the past that it wasn't fulfilled. So the false hope at some point always collapses, and then you come into another defense. Usually you get into primary defense where you think, oh, it's all my fault. Nobody's helping me, everybody, I have to do everything alone. And that's usually, we go from one defense into another all the time, and everyone has their own little patterns. And the whole trick is to learn to see when you are finding yourself in a defense. That's why it's good to understand exactly which defense goes with what feeling, with what thoughts, with what energy, with what bodily responses. Now, the other one is false power. This defense is connected to stress. Actually, the other one too, false hope, is also very much connected to stress. And even euphoria. When you are in the beginning of a false hope defense, you might actually be very excited, but overly excited, like, oh my God, I'm going there, I cannot miss this. And that's how you know you're in a defense. And the false power is the same thing, but the opposite thought. It's a thought where you think, if only the others do this or that, then everything will be fine. So this will express itself in all kind of feelings. Like, it can be a slight irritation or annoyance, feeling of annoyance or anger. It can express itself in jealousy, in cynicism, in knowing everything better than someone else. You always, you're constantly critical and judging. When you're judging others, or even when you're judging the government, you keep saying, well, the government this, the government that, or that politician or this person. Whenever you're judging others, you're in false power. So false power and false hope are on this level, the third level of the wall of denial, the wall of defenses. And then the highest level is denial of needs. This defense is quite difficult to tackle. It's a little bit harder to understand when you're in it. It's also the furthest removed from the pain. So it's really harder to actually get to the old pain and, you know, demask this illusion. Denial of needs is how do you say, characterized by pretense that everything is all right constantly. And it's really there to numb your feelings. You don't want to feel, so you do everything to not feel. You might be binge watching series, you might be smoking, you might be eating sweets or eating food, you might have an alcohol addiction or other addictions. Any kind of addiction is in this denial of needs defense. All these are, the aim of all these things are to numb your feelings, not to feel. So the state you're in is, and this is the big difference with the adult consciousness, because it might sometimes seem that someone is very zen and very mature, but in fact they're in denial of needs. Because in denial of needs, you say everything's fine, nothing, I don't really need anything, I don't have needs, in order, you know, to be in that numbing of feelings sphere. While when you are in the adult consciousness and you are actually in a state where you have very deep feelings, you have very deep feelings of joy, you have deep feelings of fulfillment. When something sad happens, you might feel very, very sad, but there are adequate responses to the input. So when it's not adequate, you know that it's a defense. For example, when you're in denial of needs, you might constantly say, actually what I want to say is you are in a kind of a gray state. There's not intense colors, there's no intensity in your life, there's no passion, there's not really a direction, you don't really know what to do, you're not fulfilling your potential. So it's a kind of a limited state of being. And actually much of society now is very much in this defense, and it's totally idealized. People think it's a good thing when, you know, all you do is watching movies and you know, running away from really being and feeling and all that. So those are very shortly the 5 defenses. And now I want to just go quickly. I don't know how much more time we have. I can't see my clock here. Let me just look. Okay, we still have a little bit of time. Now the symbol, as I said, if we look at this is the consciousness, the model of consciousness. This is the experiences which have hurt us, the pain we had to repress. And we are not conscious of this part of our consciousness. So it's divided by a wall. These are the defenses. Now, when in my adult consciousness, I perceive either, but it's with the 5 senses. Usually it's seeing or hearing, but it could also be smell. So when I perceive something outside myself, it's outside my consciousness, which is threatening, it's reminding my brain of here, it catapults me to the old pain, but immediately on to the wall of denial. So in the beginning, when we haven't done any of this work yet, the defense, the system may work so well that we never even notice that we touched on this old pain, because we're very, you know, our immune system is very good at immediately getting us into thoughts like angry thoughts or feeling of guilt, or, you know, any of the defenses. So this is what happens when we are triggered by by something we perceive outside of ourselves. Okay, so to come to a conclusion of this introduction, what we need to know at the beginning is we need to understand this circle of consciousness very well. And I made the experience that you have to reread and rehear and repeat this many times until it's really in your brain and in your consciousness, because it's really a concept that is, it's not so easy to remember, even though it's very simple. Also, it's very important to learn the 5 defenses in the beginning very well and understand which one is connected to which feeling. And we're going to practice with that to recognize the defenses in order to be able to do the work. Now, when you learn about PRI and you learn this method, you should know that it is not like most psychology theories or practices. It's not analytical. It's more like a toolbox of tools, which, on the one hand, it's the model which makes you understand how we function. And then it's a toolbox which gives you the tools to actually kind of find the exact code to access that old pain and help yourself, your brain, to integrate the knowledge around that pain, which means that you with understanding. So you reprocess through with the cortex, with the part of your brain that can do the cognitive work. You process it, and the knowledge that this experience, this old pain, is not threatening, life-threatening anymore. It has happened, it's over, and we cannot change it. And it doesn't matter, because now we are independent. Now we can make our own choices. So we learn to decode that, to open it up, to integrate it into our adult consciousness, and it is less and less repressed. And that means that we are less and less the victim of our unconscious self shooting us into defenses and behavior that is, not healthy for ourselves, for our environment, and very, it makes you a captive. So if we want to be freed, liberated from these automatic behaviors that we often find very difficult to control, because, when old pain is touched upon, we just shoot in there and we don't know how that happened. I don't want to be like that. But it just happens again and again. What can I do to change that? And now this is a toolbox to do that, and much more. Actually, it goes much further. It goes into mental health. It goes into serious addictions, anorexia. All those themes can actually be addressed with this method. So I want to stop here, and I hope we have a little bit of time. Maybe you can unmute, and if any one of you has something to ask right now. If nobody unmutes,
Hi, Helen. Thanks for that. That's really interesting. So would this unconscious part also be kind of known as the ego? Like this protective barrier. Interested party.
Yes, I have exactly the same thought, Elisa. And actually, Ingeborg Bosch, the therapist who developed it, has a chapter in her book, in one of her books, which goes exactly into this comparison of a spiritual approach to life, because she's also very spiritual and she believes in God, and so, and she compares it also to that. And I was thinking exactly the same thing. And there's more parallels, whereas, in our spiritual work, we have, and I actually think, and I know for myself, that there are other ways to integrate this old consciousness into our adult consciousness, because otherwise there wouldn't be any wise people in the world, because, so there are spiritual ways, and it's just that this toolbox is a good help to make it more practical. Anyone else? Or did you, yeah?
I've got another question. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Go on. Amy?
Oh, no, go on. Sorry, I was waiting for Elisa. Sorry.
Elisa, you didn't finish. Sorry. I can't hear you. I think she has muted. Yeah, Amy, I think it's your turn.
Oh, yeah. So I was just going to ask, also apologise for having my microphone unmuted earlier, then you might have heard some baby screaming.
No.
I was just figuring out Zoom. But anyway, I got rid of that baby, so it's okay. It struck me when you said about integrating the old, because I missed the beginning and maybe I missed something important, but when you mentioned about integrating old consciousness with, when you showed the diagram and we kind of hit that defense wall, and the whole point is that we integrate the kind of feelings that we have that are triggered now with our old experiences, using kind of using our cortex, using the brain that we're able to actually understand with knowledge. Is the implication of that then that because what that led me to think was, are the kind of those painful experiences that we have predominantly in early childhood when we can't process them with the brain? Is that the implication?
Yes, she says, Ingeborg Bosch says that it's really up to 3 years when we develop the glasses through which we see the world for the rest of our lives. And it doesn't mean that we cannot, we can work on that and we can actually change that in a certain way. But it's the very early childhood which sets this pattern of how we work with these defenses, which makes this wall of denial. And whatever happens after is usually also the way we react to that is very much determined by what we have experienced as very young children. So the more trauma there is and the bigger trauma there is, and trauma is often, we have to understand that trauma is whatever we experience as a young child, a very young child, a baby, when our needs haven't been fulfilled, and when we have been left alone with that. So the more we have been left alone with that, the bigger is the trauma. It's not so much what happened as if we had to go through that alone. So that's a very interesting aspect of trauma. So we get this pattern, the way our wall of denial functions, very much set in those very early years. And she also has done this PRI with her own children from the time they were 9. She was doing regressions with them. Regressions can be part of the work. It's not absolutely essential, and it's only one part of it, but it can be very helpful. And she said it was amazing that children actually understand this system very well. And if you practice explaining it to people, it might be worth explaining it to a child, because they seem to connect to the whole idea very quickly and easily.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I do have another question, if that's okay. So if you were to find yourself being triggered, obviously, like, the first step would be an awareness of, oh, I'm being triggered, or I'm feeling stressed, or whatever it is. What would you then do? What would the next step of the work be, using this toolbox?
Yes, there is a lot. There's like a whole method, which is these tools they can be learned. Everyone can learn this. It's like a way of life. And we will go over these steps if you guys can join for more sessions, or otherwise I will try to record them so you can learn about this. And these steps are actually done personally by each person. If you have some bigger problems in your life that you need to work on and you feel you cannot do it alone, there are therapists that actually do it with this method and that do sessions with Skype and telephone and else. But actually it's really it's available for every single person, and we can help each other learning the method and starting to apply it. So the steps are quite simple but not easy. So once we get to those steps, you will understand, and we will also practice doing like recognizing when am I in a defense, how do I recognize that, and then practicing what is the symbol for me, what was the symbol, and then once you know the symbol, what is the meaning, what is the symbol telling me, and then you will come to the point where you find exactly that point which hurts you and which connects you to the old pain, and you experience the old pain. You are free to let it come because you are aware that it's old. And that's the moment where it kind of clicks with now, because it's like two films are playing. Like in the front is the film playing of what's happening right now, and in the back is like a black and white movie playing of your childhood. And it's kind of, you know, messing things up in the front sometimes. So we interpret everything we experience here with this film that is in the back. You know, that's the glasses we are wearing. So sometimes you may, just by a glance of someone or by something somebody says, you might be catapulted into this old pain. And so the two get intermingled and you are not clear. And when you actually come to this moment where you are hit by this old pain, and you know this is the old movie that's playing, and it has nothing to do with now, and not with the symbol, the person that actually said something has nothing to do with this. It is like there a click happens, and you click into the present, and there's an integration happening. And the more you manage to do this in your, you know, in your everyday life through moments of meditation, where you follow these steps, the less are you the victim of these unconscious processes that are happening. I think it's gonna stop in a moment, because I think it doesn't say anywhere how much time we have. But we can try. If it just cuts off, it cuts off, and we continue. I don't know if you want to do this in the next days, if it's possible for you, or what you want to do, but we can also discuss that in the chat otherwise. So any other question now? Yes, Hanna Marie?
So we're continuing this tonight.
I'm going on tonight at 8. So if you want, you can just participate if you're free tonight.
But you continue from this. You don't do the.
Yeah, I did this same thing last night. So I will continue from here. I will start with the fear defense tonight.
Okay. Okay. Good. I'd like to join.
Nice. Any other question right now? No. So do you want